Kao što je javnosti poznato i kao što ste juče ujutru na otvaranju 33. Kopaonik biznis foruma mogli da čujete, ove godine u junu mesecu Savez ekonomista Srbije biće organizator 21. Svetskog kongresa Međunarodne ekonomske asocijacije. Očekuje se dolazak više od 1000 najeminentnijih ekonomista akademičara iz čitavog sveta, među kojima je i nekoliko Nobelovaca. Kongres će biti održan u Beogradu u Kongresnom centru Sava centar. Stoga imam čast da najavim specijalnog gosta 33. Kopaonik biznis foruma, profesora Omara Likandra, člana Upravnog odbora Međunarodne ekonomske asocijacije. Gospodin Likandro je profesor na školi za ekonomiju Univerziteta u Lesteru. Obavljao je istaknute akademske funkcije na Univerzitetu u Nottinghamu, Institutu za ekonomsku analizu i Barcelona School of Economics na Evropskom univerzitetu u Firenci, Univerzitetu Carlos III u Madridu, kao i u Fondaciji za studije primenjene ekonomije u Madridu. Od 2013. do 2021. godine obavljao je funkciju generalnog sekretara Međunarodne ekonomske asocijacije, a trenutno je član Upravnog odbora. Od 2014. godine osnivač je i izvršni sekretar Istraživačkog instituta za razvoj, rast i ekonomiju. Takođe je vanredni profesor i bivši direktor istraživanja na Barcelona School of Economics, kao i saradnik instituta CESIFO, globalne nezavisne mreže istraživača. Njegove uredničke uloge uključuju pozicije urednika časopisa Statistički ekonomski anali, ekonomska istraživanja i ekonomske revije Španije. Gospodin Likandro je sa nama. Izvolite.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me and an honor to be at the Kopaonik Business Forum and to be with my good friend, Alexander. Then what I will try to convey in this lecture is what can we learn from national accounts, from the measure of what is known as GDP. That's basically the aim of this lecture. But let me just to tell you what the plan of the talk is. Then I will first ask the general question, how rich are Serbians? I hope at the end to give you an answer, or at least a partial answer. And in order to, I will, as a second thing, to talk about what GDP is, what GDP tells us, and how then we can compare GDP across countries. To at the end try to conclude something about the key question of how rich Serbians are. Then let me start by the first question. Then Serbian GDP measures production, income, and expenditure. That is by construction. I will explain a little bit more in detail this, but by construction, GDP measures these three dimensions of an economy, and in particular, this explains it for Serbia too. Then if you go to the data, and I'm just referring here to 2021 for a reason it will become clear in a minute, then the per capita GDP of Serbia at market prices was something as 917,000 dinars. That in US dollars, at the exchange rate of the time, was around $9,231. Then the exchange rate was, and it has been for long now, around 100 dinars per dollar. That's the number there. If we go to the American data, the American GDP per capita in 2021 was a little bit higher. It was of the order of $69,000, $70,000 per capita at market prices, at American market prices, of course. That is something as 7.5 times higher. That looks to be a big difference. And if you go, and I did, you go to the income distribution in the US, that this level of GDP per capita, the Serbian one, is equivalent to the bottom decile of the income distribution. Then Serbians look to be as poor as the poorest American. That's what we should conclude from this reading of the data. However, and that will be the key of my lecture, well, if you go back to 2021, unlikely the situation is very similar today. What you can buy in Serbia with 100 dinars is much more than what an American can buy in the US with $1. Then the previous comparison doesn't look to be very fair. Even it doesn't look to be correct. No? And I used to say, if you think as a Serbian, there are two completely different calculations that you do when you compare with the dollar. One is, oh, I would like to visit the US. Then I have my whatever, it depends how rich you are. Then you go to an exchange rate agent and you exchange your dinar for dollars, and you spend the dollars in the US, which is very expensive. That's completely different calculation, the one that you spend your dinars in Serbia, which is cheaper. Yeah? And then what is the right comparison? Yeah, that's what the issue of this. Then there is a measure that is called purchasing power parity that I will explain in a minute. That is the one used to compare income across countries. Then if you take this measure, the Serbian GDP per capita in 2021 was not $9,000, it was $21,000. That means, well, Serbians are poorer than Americans, but not as much. It's of the order of 3.3 times. Meaning that, well, there is, or it's important to figure out how to control by differences in price level. And that's what the PPP does. And what is the fundamental reason that explains the difference between these two numbers is that the US price level was, by the PPP measure, 2.3 times higher than in Serbia. Then one dinar has much more value in Serbia than in the US. That is the lesson. And then now I will try to go to the details of these numbers. And I will start by talking about Serbia. Then I will talk about national accounts in Serbia, where national accounts in Serbia are in dinars. There are no dollars. Well, of course, maybe there are some transactions in dollars, but the way transactions are registered in national account is, in Serbia, is in dinars. Then what does GDP measure? Well, that's the textbook answer is the market value in local currency, in dinars, and within the borders of the country, in this case Serbia, of the final production of goods and services. And by final production, we mean value added. Yeah? I will not enter in the detail of this measure because that's not the objective of my talk. But think on GDP at the origin was aimed to measure final production, and to measure income. Yeah? But the way the measure was built is through what is called expenditure. And this is the equation, that's the only equation I will show you. I will not bother you with economy we like. We see an equation worth more than 1,000 words, and it's true. When an economist see an equation, understand a lot of things in this equation. Then I will show you one that I will torture a little bit in the following slides to try to see what I can learn from this simple equation. But this equation is the way in which national accounts are measured. The statistical office of the Republic of Serbia, what they do is they survey all these items. They survey consumption by household, they survey investment by firms, they survey public expenditure. In this case, they don't survey it. They get the information directly from the public authorities. The sum of these three terms, consumption by household, investment by firms, and government spending, is what is called absorption. It's the total expenditure in the country. But, well, not all expenditure is produced domestically because we import. That's the M term. And part of our production is exported. That is the X term. Then production is whatever we spend minus the imports plus whatever we produce, but we export. That's this equation here. But let me torture it a little bit and show the two dimensions that are relevant and the two dimensions that national accounts measure or could measure. One is production. And then the only thing I did is I took the, I'm not. Oh, sorry, jumping wrongly. Okay. Then, the only thing I do here is I take the M and I move a little bit in the equation. Then and why is it important? Because the first term in the equation that called domestic market is the domestic production that goes to the domestic agents. Because total expenditure include the imports. Then let me subtract them. Then this equation tells you that total production may go to the domestic market or may go abroad. And I will give you numbers in a few slides. The other perspective, that is expenditure perspective, is, well, how much we do spend. And how much we do spend depends on domestic income, why, and money that comes from abroad. Then if we export more than we import, it means that we are sending resources abroad. But if we import more, that's the case of Serbia, than we export, then somebody is borrowing money to us that we have to pay at some point in the future. Yeah? Then total expenditure at any period, T, is our income plus whatever income the rest of the world borrow us. And I think I would like to work in these two dimensions, and it's very important to understand that national accounts give us this information. Now let me give a step backward and talk about what economists call welfare. And it's a very particular definition. There is a huge debate that I don't want to enter here. Is welfare, well-being, is happiness associated to what economists call welfare? I don't know. But I know what welfare is. And then what economists call national welfare is the discounted stream of present and future consumption utility that current and future generations in Serbia will get. That is welfare. Our welfare is how much we consume today, tomorrow, after tomorrow, in terms of how much utility this consumption gives to us. That's the first principle. It's a definition, what we mean by welfare. Think that production in a country depends on the assets the country has. And I'm thinking of physical, intangible, and human capital. Yeah? Then, if these assets are those that allow us to produce all this stream of consumption goods, well, the value of these assets is what we call welfare. Yeah? The reason why we have them is to produce consumption goods today, tomorrow, and after tomorrow. Then the question that I would like to answer is if does GDP per capita measure the welfare of the average Serbian or not? And the answer, and I will go a little bit deep later, is the answer is a qualified yes. Why? Because GDP per capita captures the welfare that comes directly from consumption, today, current consumption, but also the future consumption that we'll enjoy thanks to the investment we do today. Then we have to include investment in our measure of welfare because it includes any future consumption that will generate with this investment and then the utility associated to it. But of course, it omits anything else, right? And there are other elements that are in what people call well-being that are not included there. And I will not enter there. Then fundamentally, what national accounts can measure is the welfare that people in a country, that Serbian can enjoy from their market activities. Things that are not on the market are not in the definition of welfare, even if they can generate well-being. I love calling my mom. That's not in GDP, right? Well, it's partially because I have to pay the phone call. But, and one important thing to understand the relation between welfare and GDP is that, in fact, GDP is a return to welfare. Then if welfare is the value of our assets, and we use these assets to produce GDP, GDP is the return, right? Let me reinterpret it in terms of say business. A country is like a firm with assets and returns. GDP is the annual return of the country assets, nothing else. welfare is the present discounted value of these returns, the country's national wealth. And the value of this asset is just national wealth. Yeah? These things are, I would say they're clearly related. Then now let me go to another fundamental element, is that what is the unit of measure? Then is money the unit of measure? And the answer is yes. Then Serbia GDP is measured in dinars. There's no other way of measuring it. And there is no physical unit in which we can measure GDP. Cannot measure in tons on haircuts. Doesn't make any sense. Then we measure it in money. That's and why we do that? Because money is the natural unit of measure in economics. Because all prices in any country, in particular in Serbia, are expressed in the local currency, here in dinars. But the fundamental theory behind this argument is what is called money metric utility. And money metric utility is nothing else that any income gain translates into welfare gains. That's the fundamental. And I will show you in a very simple way what do I mean by that, or what does economy mean by that. Then suppose I gave one of you, Alexander, I gave you 10,000 dinars, and I tell you, go to a supermarket, buy whatever you want. And then you're back, here you see Alexander when he was in the early 30s, going to the supermarket, going, and then being back with a chariot full of stuff. Then I tell him, put it on a side, I give you now 20,000, go to the supermarket again. And then he will be back, but of course with more stuff. If I ask him, or any of you, what of the two chariots will Alexander prefer? The answer is the second, it's very clear. No? Then now I can price them, because I know the first is 10,000, the other is 20,000. If I want to measure the increase in satisfaction, for how much more satisfaction Alexander will get when moving from 10 to 20,000, the answer is 10,000, it's 100% more. Is this the only way of measuring? No, not at all. It's the income measure. That's what we call money metric. But if I give him, I increase the amount by 1 dinar, well, 1 dinar is very little, but say by 100 dinars, and he goes back again and again and again and again, I can order all these chariots by the money I give to him, and I can say, okay, his preferences, the value he gives in terms of satisfaction to all these chariots is ordered by the money I gave to him. That's money metric, nothing else. It's not that money in any other sense. It's money as a unit of measurement, nothing else. Yeah? That's what people call it money metric, but that's the argument behind national accounts. The problem with national accounts, and the problem with money, is that money loses value over time. Then, if I repeat the exercise, and I go back to 2005, and I gave Alexander in 2005 5,000 dinars, not 10,000 as before, likely he will buy exactly or something very similar to what he bought today with 10,000. Why? Because, and I check, the increase in prices by chance is around 100%. Between this, the inflation between today and today and 2005 was around 100%. What does it mean? It means that in today prices, the 5,000 dinars in year 2005 are equivalent to 10,000 dinars. That is what we call purchasing power. What matters is how much goods can Alexander buy with the money he has, with his income, that in this case will be the money I offer him. Yeah? Then correcting for inflation is needed to measure changes in purchasing power. And doing through this way, money metric tell us, well, I would say that today Alexander will be 100% better than he was in 2005. Yeah? Then now let me go back to national accounts. Then how economic growth is defined in the data. That's what the statistical offices do. Well, economic growth is defined at the growth rate of GDP. but Serbian GDP is measured at current dinars, in nominal terms. How do national accounts deal with inflation? Well, it's a complicated calculation. I will not go to the details. I will give you the fundamentals behind. Then GDP adds a very large number of items. Then the statistical office will create a price index, is called it a deflator, that is in the jargon of national accounts, for each of these items, and then will compute implicitly a growth rate, a real one, for each item. How much purchasing power increase in terms of this particular item. And it's just the difference between the nominal growth and inflation of the item, right? For each item, we compute the inflation rate, and we subtract, we get a real growth rate of the item. Then, real GDP, the growth rate of GDP in Serbia, is nothing else than a weighted average of all these growth rates, weighted by the share of each of the items in total income, nothing else, right? That's the way. And let me, if I can go here. Oh, I can't. Yeah, that's bad. Can somebody push the button, Serbia GDP? No? There is a button there that says Serbia GDP. If you push it. No? Yeah, this one. Thank you very much. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Oh, something is wrong here. Okay, this is the right one. Then these are the Serbian national accounts in 2024. The last, there are some data for 2025, but they are provisional. Then I prefer to use the 2024. Then you have their absorption, and you have net export and imports. And the column growth gives you the growth rate of each item. The share is the share on total income. And then the contribution is just the product of each growth rate to the share. Yeah? As you can see, absorption contributed with 5.82. The growth rate of GDP was 3.94. Then it was reported yesterday by the governor of the Bank of Serbia, the Central Bank of Serbia, and by the Minister of Finance. Then, and likely you know this data much better than me. Then GDP grows at 3.9% in 2024. Absorption contributed with 5.82, more than 3.9. And the reason is that we import a lot, or you import a lot. And then net export contributed negatively with 1.88. Then if you don't mind going back to, there is a back button at the very bottom. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, then a small comment, then if to calculate GDP per capita, the only thing you do is you subtract the growth rate of population that in 2024, and that's the last line, was 2.2%. And then the growth rate per capita, or the GDP growth rate per capita was 1.7. Yeah? Then let me be back to the equations that I showed you before. Then the growth rate I measured, the 394, is related to the first equation. It's the growth rate of output, of production. And it's interesting to see because Serbia is highly open to the rest of the world. Less than 50% of the domestic production was consumed domestically. Export were 54% of total production. Then we export more than we consume domestically of our production. On the other side, from the expenditure side, then what we do is that absorption, our expenditure, is above our income. Why? Because we import more than we export. Then we are just getting goods from abroad that, of course, we have to pay at some point in the future, right? Then I will try to use these two approaches to explain you the thing you can measure in national account. Then the first thing is there is the production perspective, and this is the perspective that national accounts take. And then you try to measure how much was produced domestically, and then what is the growth rate of what we domestically produce. In order to do that, we subtract import from absorption. Then we try to know what is the contribution, the domestic contribution in terms of expenditure to GDP. And then then can you go to the Serbia GDP? Oh, I'm very sorry, I didn't expect that I should be bothering them as much. Then here, the only thing I did is the same numbers, I reorganized them, right? And then the contribution of absorption, as I told you, was 5.82. But imports is a very important component of this absorption. When you subtract them, the growth rate of the domestically produced absorption was 2.4%. Why? Because absorption grew a lot thanks to import, not thanks to domestic production. And then the contribution of the domestically produced absorption to GDP was very small, was 1%. The main contribution came from exports. The contribution of additional exports to GDP was 2.8%. Then of the 3.9, most of the contribution came from export, not from domestically absorbed domestic production, right? Do you mind being back to then how can we measure welfare? And that's something the national accounts don't do. And I will give you a sort of out-of-envelope calculation. I don't say that they will agree with me, but I think it's a quite direct calculation. Then, what did residents consume and invest is what matters for welfare. The origin of good does not. Then if Alexander is driving a Mercedes, he will be very happy. But Mercedes will not produce it in Serbia. He's enjoyed something that was produced abroad. Then there is something that generated welfare abroad that is being enjoyed by Alexander, right? What matters in terms of trade is the external constraint. How much money we have to pay back tomorrow because we're importing more than we are exporting. Yeah? And then, if you don't mind going to the Serbia GDP. Thank you very much. Then, numbers are quite different now. Then if I take absorption of the gains on welfare that the Serbians are getting today, that will contribute with 5.82%. Of course, they are importing goods. But what matters here is the fact that they are indebted additionally, and they will have to pay it in the future. How much net export changes during 2024? By a lot. Is the number that is just in the bottom. It's almost 20%. Then net export is a trade deficit. The trade deficit increases by 20% nominally in dinars. Yeah? Then you have now to deflate it. What is the natural, and that's what in the following slides I will explain, that's what the Penguin table does. The natural deflator is deflator of absorption, right? Because that's what we are doing with this money, yeah? Or with these resources. Absorption, the deflator was 2.3. Then net export in real terms, the deficit in real terms went up by 17%. That's a huge number. However, it counts very little because it's 4%. The other 100% is something that we're enjoying now, and we don't need to repay tomorrow. Then when you subtract it, instead of subtracting something that's 1.8 something before, you subtract 0.8. And then the growth rate of GDP, when GDP measures expenditure, is 5%, not 3.9%, right? Then there are these two ways of measuring. They inform you about different dimensions of the problem, but they give you different numbers. Do you mind going back to? Then the negative contribution of trade substantially reduced. And the point here is that, in fact, trade is contributing to the welfare of, in 2024, of course, to the welfare of Serbians by 1 percentile point, which is a big number, right? Then this is something that statistical offices don't. Then I will be happy if they are interested on talking to me on ways of implementing it. I think that if these are the right numbers and these numbers repeat over time, even the Serbian government will be interested on just disclosing this measure too. But let me now go to the, and I don't know how much time still have. It's 11 minutes. Okay. Then how do we compare GDP across countries? That's the other issue. Then up to now, national account is comparing GDP in 2024 with GDP in 2023 in Serbia, in Serbian dinars. But if we want to compare with other countries, the problem became more tricky. And I like this example. Then, in the top panel, you have an American hairdresser or barber in 1950 just doing a haircut. In the bottom one, you are today in the UK with a British hairdresser, a barber, also provided the same service, a haircut. In terms of purchasing power, it's exactly the same, right? It's one haircut, right? It's a very, very simple example. How can we measure it? How does national account measure it? Well, if you go back to 1950 in the US, a national account started in 1947 there, then the value of it was 50 cents of dollars. In today prices in the UK, the same service will cost 15 pounds. That's what I pay to my barber. How can I compare things? Here is trivial because in purchasing power it's exactly the same. Then I can now figure out how to measure it. All right. Then if I want to measure the PPP value of $1 in 1950 in the US is equivalent to 30 pounds in the UK in 2026. That is PPP. That is what the Penworth table tried to do, is to create these numbers in order to compare GDP between countries, right? Then I have this example that goes in the same direction, but let me just go directly to, I wanted to, sorry, do the same mistake. I wanted to compare Alexander with another friend I have in China, but I will do another day. Then, in order to do that, and that's the key issue, is how can we control for cross-country PPP in the data? And this is related to what is known as the International Comparison Program that started long ago. Then the way is that then we need to collect prices across all countries in a common basket of goods. And that's what the ECP does. The ECP collects prices on a large number of comparable goods and services worldwide. And they use these numbers in order to construct measures of PPP. To do, I do the same mistake all the time. To do this calculation, right? In order to do this calculation, they do it in a more complicated way because fortunately there is no only haircuts in the economy. Then they had to go through all these goods and to get prices in all countries and do the comparison I was doing for the haircut. Then these prices will allow to compare GDP across countries in the same purchasing power unit. Yeah? The reason I use in 2021 is because the last released ICP data was the 2021. And the next one will be the 2024 data will be released next year. Then I cannot tell. They have a tricky ways of constructing, and you can get the 2023 prices, but I prefer to be honest and use the 2021. Then the second important element in the construction of this comparable data is the Penworth table. What the Penworth table does is use national accounts data from a very large, it's almost all countries in the world, set of countries, and the ICP data. They combine both in order to construct income level for each country. Then the Penworth table measures country GDP after correcting for price level differences from PPP. Yeah? I think this figure will convey very clearly what I want to mean. Then suppose that you have two countries, the Aztecs and the Mayas. The Aztecs produce cacao, and the Mayas produce corn. And in year 1350, the per capita production of the Aztec was 2 baskets of cacao, and the average production of the Mayas was 8 corn cobs of maize. Yeah? Then they will change, they like to consume the same. Then the only possibility is that the Mayas will send corn to the Aztecs, and the Aztecs will say cacao to the Mayas, and the rate will be 4 corn cobs per basket of cacao, and they will consume exactly the same, right? Then the Aztec will consume 1 basket of cacao and 4 corn cobs of maize. In 1450, the Mayas improve a lot their production. They move from 8 per capita to 20 per capita. Yeah? Then if we want to measure in terms of production and compare these two countries, what production tells us is that the Aztecs will produce in all with the same, 2 baskets of cacao. But the Mayas multiply their production by 2.5. Then when GDP is measured in terms of output, this is the number that will come, right? If we try to measure in terms of welfare, in terms of expenditure, well, they will consume exactly the same. 1 basket of cacao plus the corresponding level of corn. Then the key thing here is that through trade, in terms of welfare, the Mayas are sharing their prosperity with the Aztecs. And depending on how we measure things, we will get it or not. And that's related to what I told you before, for Serbia in dinars. Then if you measure production, you get what you are doing. If you measure expenditure, you measure what you are enjoying. Yeah? And these numbers are not the same. Yeah? And then let me, because I have 5 minutes, let me be back to the initial question. How rich are Serbians? Yeah? And what we can learn from the... then this is just the same argument I built before. If I compare in dollars, the Americans are 7.5 times richer than the Serbians. If I measure in PPP, and PPP here is the Penworth table, I took this data directly from the Penworth table, then Serbia will be, of course, poorer, but not as poorer as it looks to be when you compare in current dollars. These 2 graphs are, these are the Penworth table data. Then the first one is from 93 to, I think it's 2023, the last data is from 93 to 23 is the ratio of the US GDP per capita to the Serbians' GDP per capita in PPP units. And this is expenditure, in expenditure units. And as you can see, there is convergence. Of course, we are still very far. We are at 3. Then they are still 3 times richer. And it seems that the velocity of convergence is reducing a lot. And there is the figure is very steep, and then it becomes, it's not flat, but quite flat. Then if we keep going this direction, it will take a long time to get there. But there is some convergence. And this is one of the points of debate in the previous days. If there is convergence, there is some, but not enough. Yeah? The second graph, it compares the 2 measures, the expenditure and the output measure. And what's interesting to see is that it's going up. Then we're enjoying more and more than we are producing. Yeah? And the relevant thing is we overpass 1, because when it's above 1, it's because we are clearly enjoying more than we produce. Our GDP is, and that's the number I showed you. Even when you measure it in dinar, you get the same number. You see, the measure of GDP in terms of expenditure, that is the current measure for welfare, is larger today than the measure of production. And it's part of a trend, right? And then and I think I'm almost done. This is my last slide. Then I wanted to compare, because there is all this issue of, well, what's going on with Balkans countries that accede in the European Union? Are they performing better than Serbia or not? And well, when you measure as before, and how richer Americans are with respect to each of these countries, clearly Serbia was always performing worse. There is convergence. The others are converging too. There is, well, Slovenia was always, from the beginning, in much better position than the others. But when you give a look to the others, you see that in the case of Bulgaria and Romania, there is some acceleration around the accession to the European Union, but then the slope becomes very similar to the Serbian one. And in the case of Croatia, you don't see nothing relevant related to accession to the European Union. I given data that will go against what I would suggest you, that is, please do your best to become members of the European Union. But yes, it may be there is something, but it's not so strong. Unlikely related to, but because this is a very important thing. I was living in Spain when the euro was created. And one thing that you observe there is Spain for a while had more inflation than the other countries. Why? Because the law of one price starts working when this movement of goods and services is free. Then there is conversion in prices. Then it may be that what's going on, I didn't have time to check, that in Bulgaria and Romania, what is going on is that the GDP in nominal terms is growing faster, but the price level is growing faster too. But I don't know. That's just pure speculation. Okay, then I think I'm finishing on time. I have a last slide that say many thanks for the invitation. It was a pleasure.